Welcome to the Three Voices Podcast. I'm Jamie Blue. We are here to talk about our experiences that get labeled psychotic, including voices, mania, paranoia, and unusual beliefs. Some of us have been hospitalized and given diagnosis. Some of us have not. We are free to use any language we want to explain our experiences in extreme states, including salty or triggering language. Some people sometimes describe their experiences as positive, spiritual, or supernatural. We are here to share, listen, and learn. So it's okay if you hear things you agree with or disagree with. It's okay if people like their meds or don't like their meds, like their doctors or don't like their doctors. We respect a diversity of views. I would like to go on record and say that we are not professionals, doctors, or therapists. We are not giving advice. We are simply peers. We are telling stories and experiences from our own perspectives, and we are hoping to share what we can glean from those experiences and from common knowledge that you yourself can find through the internet, books, and other media. We will give links in the description so that you yourself can do your own research. If at any time you believe that you might have something that may need to be diagnosed or treated, we recommend that you seek professional help. Before we dive into today's topic, I'd like to go over some of the things we would be talking about. Today we're going to be talking about mood disorders. We're going to be talking specifically about depression and bipolar. Depression and bipolar type 1 and type 2 can be misunderstood. I will put in the description some links to some articles so that you can do some reading, and so that, if needed, you can seek some help and some support groups if you think that this is something that you might be suffering from. Now, depression is more than just sadness. Sadness is normal. It is normal and okay to go through periods of sadness and to go through the blues or to have a bad mood after events in life. It becomes depression when it is prolonged. Specifically, 2 weeks or longer is an episode of depression. Depression also is classified when it affects other areas of your life, when it makes it difficult to work, to study, to hold relationships and friendships, and sometimes when it makes it difficult to even get out of bed. Depression becomes a heavy weight on a person, and sometimes it makes it difficult to even reach out for help. This is why often, for a person who has depression, it is their friends, their family, their peers who often intervene and are the ones who help them to see that it is depression that is overruling their life. Now, as for bipolar type 1 and type 2. Bipolar, also known as manic depression, is known as bipolar because you're swinging between opposite polar moods. Sometimes these swings can be within hours, days, or weeks of each other. You can go from elevated points of mania, where you're very happy. Some people might feel as if they are almost godlike. Their thoughts might be scrambled, and they may have what might clinically be described as a delusion, where their thoughts begin to take on a fantasy-type quality. And then there are the low points, the depressions. The points where their days and hours feel much longer and darker. Bipolar often takes on swings that follow seasons. Often in the fall and winter, people become depressed, and in the spring and summer, they would become manic. This is not always true for everyone. While depression often sets in adults and can set in children, bipolar often sets in as depression and can later manifest as bipolar. I personally was misdiagnosed with bipolar after having a long childhood of depression. It was not until I was in my 30s that I was diagnosed with schizoaffective bipolar type. Schizoaffective bipolar type means that I had schizophrenia symptoms and a mood disorder being bipolar symptoms. Bipolar can have symptoms similar to schizophrenia, meaning having the elevated senses and some hallucinations and delusions. But when those are present without the mood swings, that is considered schizophrenia. So when you have schizophrenia symptoms coupled with depression or bipolar, that is when it becomes schizoaffective. When you treat one disorder as a misdiagnosis, it can complicate things, which is why we recommend you see a professional. When you see a professional, it is important to give them all of the details. Sharing with them what to you might seem as a minor detail, to them could be the key to helping them understand and see the bigger picture so that they can help you. Often, something that is a mental illness is related to an event that has happened in your life that could be a physical illness or a trauma. It is very difficult to treat one without the other. I highly recommend you be involved with your treatments. Ask questions. Be aware of your medications. Combine talk therapy, groups, medications. Know what your options are. Do your research. Involve your friends and family. And make others aware of what you look like when you're happy. Make others aware of what you look like when you're depressed. When you can pay attention to yourself and know what you look like, you can make it easier for others to know when you are in danger. Because often, it is difficult for us to know when we are in danger. It is my hope that through sharing our experiences here on the Three Voices podcast, that we will help you, the listeners, our peers, to find a better way to manage your own symptoms and experiences so that you have more control over what's going on in your life. I don't enjoy when my symptoms rule my life, and I could only imagine that others don't enjoy when their symptoms rule theirs. I am hoping to provide as many opportunities to find tools so that you can help yourself and find what works for you. For some, medication works, and for others it does not. For some, meditation works, and for others it does not. There is no one right way. I highly recommend you start with one place and be honest with yourself and with your care team. If you don't have a care team right now, make one. In the description, I will put links to various different ways to find self-care techniques, support groups, other podcasts, and articles that may be of interest. I will also, of course, link the site for our guest so that you can have a deeper look into the work that she has done. And I invite you, if you have any work or any art that you have done, please share it with us. I have an Instagram going for Three Voices Podcast. We now have a hashtag on Instagram that you can share your art with us. Hashtag #ThreeVoicesArt. I would love to see what it is that you do to help you cope with your own symptoms, be it voices, visions, depression, mania. I would just love to see how it is that you get your creative self out there. Thank you for joining us. I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name's Liz Obert. I'm an artist living in Portland, Oregon, and I'm also an associate professor at Linfield College, teaching photography and digital media. And I also have bipolar type 2.
You have a couple of different projects that you're working on. I am most familiar with what you shared at the NAMI conference, which is Dualities. Would you like to explain a little bit more about that and how you got into that?
Sure. Dualities is a photo series that I did where I took photographs of people who have bipolar and depression. I took one photograph of them, what they do when they're depressed, and the other one, how they want to be seen to the world. I also had them write captions underneath each photo expressing what they feel like in those times.
How long have you been working on that?
I worked on that for probably 3 or 4 years.
You have quite a collection going.
Mm-hmm.
So when you first started working on that, how did you get people to start taking photographs?
Well, I started with myself. I did a self-portrait because I wanted to tap into something personal in my work. I decided that I was living this kind of dual life of having one presence that I showed to the world and then another presence that was when I got home and kind of would fall apart. And so I wanted to document those two different sides. Once I did that, I started approaching friends who also had either bipolar or depression. They were gracious enough to let me photograph them.
So it started with you and then it moved to friends. And then at what point did it move beyond your friends circle?
I did friends of friends at first, and then I had an article published about it in Slate magazine. That went viral, and I got emails from people all over the world discussing the Dualities project and people volunteering to sit for the photographs.
That's amazing. So I know that I've gone through some of them, and I've noticed that there's no age limit. It's just a wide range of people. Is it all local Portlander people?
Some are also from New York and Seattle.
Are you working on that project anymore?
I am not working on it right now.
Okay. Do you still have contact with beyond obviously you have contact with your friends?
Through the project, I met people that have become my friends, really good friends. In that sense, I am connected with some of them. Some of them I haven't heard from since I photographed them.
I know that you had said that it kind of branched back into your personal life with people. Am I right?
Yes, yeah. How I would approach things is when people would contact me, I would first meet them for coffee or a drink or a meal or something like that. And so we'd get to know each other, and usually just a public place. And then they would decide how they wanted to be photographed, and I would come to their house and photograph them. After that, I would print out the photograph itself and either meet with them again and have them write on it or mail it back to them if it was somebody in New York that I wasn't in contact with.
It obviously is a very personal thing. You're tapping into a very personal part of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they kind of are staged photographs, but in a very real and emotional way. They are tapping into that part of themselves. So I can imagine that process may have taken a while. Am I right?
Yes. I think when I first meet with them, I get to hear their stories, which is usually really touching because people have been through so much. And I think they're really brave to come forward and say, like, I want to be part of this project. And then sometimes when I'm photographing them, especially in the depression part, it'll bring back emotions that they have. So they'll actually begin feeling depressed. And so we usually do that one first, and then they get dressed up and do the kind of more how they want to be seen to the world portrait.
The more upbeat.
The more upbeat one.
And I really enjoyed seeing that different people's upbeat were very different and broad, and that some of them still held elements in both. I mean, video games don't necessarily go away given that, and some people it was very clean when they were depressed, and when they were up and happy it was very cluttered. And I liked that just because you are depressed or you have bipolar, it doesn't necessarily fit a prescription, and that really shows through.
Yeah, I think photographing people in their environment is really kind of taps into something about their personality as well.
So do you feel like going through the project changed or affected you? Do you feel like you processed through anything while you were going through this?
I do feel like it changed me in a way because I think the stigma went away for me, because when I first started the project, I was really afraid to write on my own photograph and to be very honest with myself and write down what I was truly feeling. And since everybody else was so honest and had these great captions on theirs, it made me feel more comfortable to be open about my bipolar, to be able to reach out and help other people. So I've done work about depression before. Many, many years ago, I lived in New York City and was incredibly depressed and was probably mixed state manic, and produced a body of work that was about depression, where I made these cubes and I photographed myself in black and white, my torso on the outside of them. And then if you looked inside, you would see a photograph of me looking up in color, kind of peering through, because I felt like I was at the bottom of a well all the time when I was depressed. So that was kind of the first time I tapped into it to make artwork.
Has your medium always been photography then?
It's been photography and mixed medium. I've done some sculpture with it. I've done some painting and collage. I've done a little installation work as well.
Okay. I really like the idea of the looking in and having that. I really like that. I've just recently started painting again. As a matter of fact, the artwork for episode 2 was the first painting I've done since I was in school.
Wow.
It's actually a painting of my headmates. I call them headmates because they're like roommates in my head. So they're people only I see. I find that a lot of the people in my groups share that artistic medium in terms of getting out their processing. Did you get into art through other means, or was it part of your mental health?
I've always done art since I was little. I was kind of a sickly child. I had asthma really bad and was hospitalized a lot as a kid. And so I think because of that, I was always limited to a little bit more quiet activities and was just drawn to do art. So when I went to college, I went in as an art major. And it wasn't until I was in college that I realized that I had depression. And it wasn't until years later that I probably named it and started seeking out help for it.
Okay. Now that you are publicly known, because the Slate went viral, you were in the top 10 internationally, right?
It was the top 10 most popular stories on Slate magazine for the year.
Right. And that was very recent. So now that you're known, it's very open, and your story is out there along with everybody else. Has that affected your teaching and your career and how people view you?
I'm not sure. I've always been pretty open about having, I used to call it depression, now it's bipolar type 2. I would say that when the article broke, it was kind of a shock to my system, being kind of a poster child for bipolar type 2. But I just gradually got used to it. And with my classes, I'm very honest, because I will just show them my artwork and then talk about being bipolar type 2. And I find that I have many students that suffer from depression, especially. I think it's a good reminder to them that they're not alone. And that you can go places even though that you have depression. You can be successful.
So you said that after you watched people going and being really honest on their photographs and what they had to say, that you had wished that you had been more honest. Do you think that you could share what maybe you would have changed about that if you could go back?
Yes. When I first started, I just made a list of things that I thought about in each state of mind, not really what was going on. And then people took it to another level. Now, if I did it again, I would talk about more feeling suicidal at times and really that lack of connection and go a little bit deeper into it, rather than I feel like what I wrote was kind of surface orientated.
I like that. So what I'm hearing is that something that would have previously been kind of a scary, stigmatized thing has been accepted and celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
And because you are still teaching and still in a point of kind of, you're in a public spotlight. So you still have this opportunity to reach, not only as a teacher, but you're kind of a beacon in terms of, hey, you can have this, it's okay, and you can still be successful and have symptoms. So looking back at who you were when you first got your diagnoses, I know how it affected me when I got my diagnoses. And so I'm kind of curious how that affected you. And then also, do you think that you would have ever believed that this scenario or where you are now would have been possible?
I had a friend sit me down and basically do an intervention and tell me that I was depressed. And I just, it just made me just break down in tears. And it was such a release to have a name for it. So that helped me then. And then when I was diagnosed finally with bipolar type 2, they switched my medication, and that made a world of difference. So I think that diagnosis was less about the naming of it and more about the medication change.
It was less about having an identifying thing and more about getting help.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that at that point you ever saw it as being something that positive could have come out of?
Not really. Yeah. I mean, I think especially when I was depressed, it's really hard to seem optimistic about anything. And so I never would have dreamed that I could be a beacon or a spokesperson for this disorder. And I never know whether they call it a disorder or a disease or...
I think disorder is accurate. I mean, your mind is not in order.
Right. Yeah. So this disorder, and I could have never imagined to the extent that it touched people from around the world, because once it was published in Slate, then it was published in different publications in like Germany and Portugal and Spain and all over the world. And so it really had this broader audience, and I would never have dreamt that that could come from me.
To people who are listening now, do you have any recommendations or words for them in terms of people who are coming to terms with their own depression and bipolar? I know for me, I found going to NAMI groups and to Voices groups was where I found mine, and now I'm adding to mine art. Were there things that for you helped as you went through your first stages of your mental health recovery?
I think for me it was seeking help, finding a good therapist, because I also had what I consider to be a poor therapist in New York that was very not helpful in tapping into what was going on with me. So I think finding a good therapist, if you possibly can find a network of people to support you, it's, I think, really important, whether it's through group therapy or just friends or family, and let your friends and family know what's going on with you, because they want to help you and they love you. And so they will be there to support you if you let them.
Yeah, the therapist, I like that you brought that up. My first real therapist, I didn't know that you could essentially break up with a bad therapist until mine got horribly bad. But yeah, finding a good therapist is kind of like dating. You should really be honest, and if you don't like your therapist, then you should not be seeing them. And a lot of people, I don't think, realize that. So it's kind of good to know that other people go through that.
Yeah, I had no idea. I'm like, this guy's a professional. This is what therapy must be like.
If you're not getting better, if it's not something that you're enjoying, maybe check in with somebody else. Huh?
Yes.
Yeah. So is there any kind of reading material or any kind of things that you studied or watched or anything that like helped you get through any of your darker times?
I actually like to read fiction novels. So reading actually does help a lot. I'll read fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, or just regular novels. That helps me get out of my head and into somebody else's, I guess.
I like that.
The concentration on the written word helps me to focus more so than like watching a movie, because when you watch a movie, there's so much, other input that can still come in.
I like that. That makes sense. Also, I feel like a book takes so much more concentration and length to get through than a movie. But yeah.
I just want to say thank you to the people that have posed for me, because I think they're amazing and really brave to come out and do that.
Thank you for taking time to do this. Thank you for all the work that you do. And as I understand, you're continuing on with another project. Is that right?
I am, yes. I am photographing urban campers. So a group of people specifically in Southeast that I've been following that are houseless and just trying to survive on the streets and their struggles that they deal with daily.
That's a real struggle, and I appreciate that you're willing to not only share what that is like, but share an honest look at what that is like. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you for listening to the Three Voices podcast. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation. So if you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us at our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, or through Gmail. Until next time, don't forget to take care of yourself and each other.